Meanwhile, controversy continues over President Trump's approach in Ukraine. It is unclear exactly what the vast gap is actually between what Trump wants and what is likely to be achieved at this point. President Trump has made very clear that what he would like is presumably for Russia to retain control of the Donbass and Crimea, and for the Ukrainians to be given security guarantees, but not NATO membership. He's been ripping on Vladimir Zelenskyy. It is very unclear at this point why he has been ripping on Vladimir Zelenskyy. I understand there are a lot of people who believe false things about Zelenskyy, such as that he is a dictator. He is not, in fact, a dictator. He is the legally elected president of Ukraine during times of martial law, when like half your country is occupied by another country. Many of your people have actually run to other countries as refugees, and many of your people are actually, on the front lines fighting. It turns out very difficult to hold an election. Zelenskyy has been called that. President Trump suggested there needs to be a new election before some sort of peace deal is held. That doesn't seem to make a whole hell of a lot of sense. For his part, Zelenskyy came out over the weekend and said, listen, if me resigning would create peace, I'd be happy to do it. Or give me security guarantees, NATO member, do something, and then I'll resign. Happy to leave as soon as the war has basically come to some sort of conclusion that actually guarantees Ukraine's safety and security for the foreseeable future.
If you really need me to leave for the sake of peace, I'm ready to do so. I am focused on security for Ukraine today, not in 20 years' time. And I'm not going to hang around in power for decades.
It's important, I think, to put some context around Zelensky's remarks about him resigning. He said that if it brought peace to Ukraine or gave Ukraine NATO membership, he'd be willing to step aside.
Now, the truth is, if Zelenskyy himself stepped down today, presumably the person who picked up the baton, because there wouldn't be an election, would be somebody who very largely agrees with Vladimir Zelensky's approach. The Ukrainians have lost hundreds of thousands of people dead or wounded. They are not simply going to allow a situation in which Russia can walk through the front door and into Kyiv in the very, very near future. And here's the thing. I don't think the Trump administration wants that either. I think a lot of this is a distraction. I think a lot of the talk about the controversy between Trump and Zelenskyy has nothing to do with sort of the on-the-ground reality. And you keep seeing that from various members of the Trump administration. So, for example, Pete Hegseth, who is the defense secretary, he says, listen, President Trump, he's made comments about this sort of stuff, but we know who invaded whom, and we're not interested in watching Ukraine just turn into effectively a Russian territory.
We know who invaded who. We understand the stakes of this game. America, more than any other country in the world, has invested in helping Ukraine defend itself. Now it's time for peace, and that's what the president is dedicated to. So standing here and saying, you're good, you're bad, you're a dictator, you're not a dictator, you invaded, you didn't, it's not useful. It's not productive. And so President Trump isn't getting drawn into that in unnecessary ways. And as a result, we're closer to peace today than ever before.
Okay, and he's right about all of that. This is a line that was repeated by Mike Waltz, the national security advisor. He said, listen, President Trump has said that Russia invaded Ukraine under Obama. Russia invaded Ukraine under Biden. Russia did not invade Ukraine under Trump. So, it's a tacit acknowledgement that Russia invaded Ukraine under Joe Biden, obviously. So here is Mike Waltz saying that.
Who would you rather having go toe-to-toe with the likes of Vladimir Putin, Kim Jong-un, Xi, or anyone else? Joe Biden or Donald Trump? He's the deal maker in chief. He's the commander in chief. And it's only because of his strength that we're even in this position. And President Trump's own words have been that Russia invaded a neighbor under Bush, under Obama, and under Biden, but not him. It didn't happen his first term, and he's going to bring it to an end his second term.
Now, again, does this sound like surrender to you? It doesn't sound like surrender to me. There's a lot of controversy, again, over sort of the verbiage surrounding the Ukraine war. But is this like a total shift in American policy? It doesn't really feel like that. Democrats are trying to make it that way. And this is where, again, I start to get a little bit annoyed. You guys had your shot. This conflict should have come to its terminus back in 2022. And then you had 3 subsequent years to do something about it, and you did nothing. Instead, you slow-walked aid to Ukraine so that they couldn't actually go into Donbass and Crimea. And at the same time declared that the war should continue. You wanted it both ways, and now you're stuck. So when I hear you guys talk about how Donald Trump is surrendering to the Russians, you guys, what was your plan? Do you have an alternative? This is the thing about Democrats. What's the alternative? They do the same thing with Gaza. Trump provides an alternative plan for Gaza, the only realistic plan I've ever heard about Gaza that actually accords with, actual factual on-the-ground reality. And they start screaming about it. Same thing with regard to Ukraine. Here is Senator Jack Reed of Rhode Island.
Essentially, this is President Trump surrendering to the Russians. No surprise. In Afghanistan, he sat down with the Taliban, excluded the government of Afghanistan in Doha through his emissaries, and they essentially said, listen, don't bother us for a year and we'll be out. And now he's trying the same thing, which is basically we're going to undercut the Ukrainians. Oh, and by the way, we're going to get their precious minerals at bargain rate prices as a threat to do even worse. This is not a statesman or a diplomat. This is just someone who admires Putin, does not believe in the struggle of the Ukrainians, and is committed to cozying up to an autocrat.
Well, Jack Reed right there, he mentions these mineral contracts in the United States is actually suggested as the Ukrainians. And Zelensky's pushing back. He's saying, you guys want too much from me. Let's make a different deal. All of that is perfectly rational and within the realm of reality. If Zelensky can negotiate a better deal with the Europeans or with the United States for those rare earth minerals, great for him, good for him. And that would be good for both the United States and Ukraine because, as the Trump administration has openly suggested, an economic relationship with Ukraine enshrines American security interests in Ukraine, much the way the United States has security interests in Taiwan, for example. With almost 2 entire months of the new year already behind us. Wow. I need to make sure that I'm maintaining my health, hitting the gym, spending time with my family. There's a lot going on. When I was younger, I used to think I could just power through on pure conservative willpower and caffeine. I learned pretty quickly. Peak performance requires peak nutrition, and that means eating enough veggies. That's why I'm so thankful to have Balance of Nature, which fits right into even the busiest of days. Imagine trying to eat 31 different fruits and veggies every single day. That sounds miserable, time-consuming. With Balance of Nature fruits and veggies, there's never been a more convenient dietary supplement to ensure you get a wide variety of fruits and veggies daily. Balance of Nature takes fruits and veggies, they freeze-dry them, they turn them into a powder, and they put them into a capsule. You take your fruit and veggie capsules every day, and then your body knows precisely what to do with them. It's kosher, which means I can pop it right into that protein shake I take every day, and it's great. Go to balanceofnature.com, use promo code Shapiro for 35% off your first order as a preferred customer, and get a free bottle of fiber and spice. That's balanceofnature.com, promo code Shapiro. Again, balanceofnature.com, promo code Shapiro. That's balanceofnature.com, promo code Shapiro for 35% off your first order as a preferred customer, and that free bottle of fiber and spice. None of that is out of the box. None of that is crazy. Now, listening to Democrats who blew up the world suddenly complain about Donald Trump coming in and trying to fix things is really bizarre. It's hard for me to think of anyone who is a worse advocate in favor of the United States than the former Obama UN ambassador and then policy advisor to Joe Biden, Susan Rice. She says that Trump on Ukraine is going to embolden China to invade Taiwan. What was it exactly when Joe Biden withdrew from Afghanistan utterly and left it to the tender predations of the Taliban? But what was that exactly?
What message does it send to Xi Jinping when Donald Trump says to Ukraine that they are the aggressor, they who are in fact the victims of an invasion, are somehow the ones who started the war, and that the price for ending the war ought to be that Ukraine gives up territory, has no security guarantees, and, oh, by the way, give over $500 billion to Donald Trump in the United States for nothing in return. If I'm Xi Jinping, I'm looking at that going, great, now's my time to invade Taiwan.
Okay, well, I mean, again, you guys set up the predicate for all this. Now, I don't want China to invade Taiwan. And one of the things that I hope the Trump administration is pursuing, and they've talked openly about this, so I assume they are, is a pivot from places like Europe, where Europe should be able to take care of its own business. Again, Europe, the EU is much larger than Russia as a collective. We can pivot from there to China and help protect Taiwan, because if Taiwan were to fall, that would have some grave consequences for Japan, for Australia, for the supply chain, for the future of pretty much all sophisticated manufactured goods. Now, all of that matters an awful lot. So the pivot, I think, is something that the Trump administration has openly talked about. But it is amazing to watch Democrats and the left-wing media freak out about Trump's foreign policy. And they're so delusional about what foreign policy even is. So Michael Birnbaum at the Washington Post has a piece called, quote, "In first month, Trump upends century-old approach to the world." So what is the century-old approach to global affairs? Quote, "Trump has gone further than he did in his first term to redefine whom the United States embraces and whom it combats, surprising fellow world leaders who thought they knew Trump's playbook and had been working to please him. Instead, the president is spurning a post-World War II international system built to block global aggressors, embracing far older ideas of allowing military powers to build regional spheres of influence and exert dominion over their neighbors." Okay, let's just be clear about this. That was also the system after World War II. The Soviet Union had a very, very, very large sphere after World War II. And President Trump is not interested in not allowing any blocking of global aggressors. If that were the case, he would, in fact, just withdraw from Ukraine and not try to broker a peace deal at all. This is my favorite sentence in the piece from the Washington Post. Quote, Trump appears to be turning back the clock to a time in world history when countries with the biggest militaries constructed empires, demanded tribute from weaker nations, and expanded their territories through coercion. Do you mean like all of human history? Is that what we're talking about? That the bizarre interregnum in which liberals thought that they could magic China into being nice to us, for example, or they could wheedle Russia into being kind, that was always a facade and always a nonsense? As Rosa Balfour, director of the Brussels office of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, says, quote, this is classical geopolitics, actually. Influence on the areas that are closest to you geographically. Now, again, that doesn't mean the United States wants to abandon the Far East. That would be a huge mistake. Or the United States wants to abandon Eastern Europe. That would also be a huge mistake. But a reshifting and realignment of interests such that the people who are closest are spending the most on the thing makes an awful lot of sense. And Democrats whining about it should have thought about that before they decided to sink billions of dollars into a quagmire in Ukraine of their own making. Are you tired of the lies and the twists of the mainstream media talking points? Yeah, me too. Join me in my newest series, Fact, where I dismantle and bring truth to this tiring mainstream agenda.